The world watched in shock this week as Vladimir Putin, the man Europe has tried so hard to isolate, stood tall in China, surrounded by some of the most powerful leaders outside the Western orbit, shoulder to shoulder with China's Xi Jinping, India's Narendra Modi, Iran's Masoud Pezeshkian, and North Korea's Kim Jong Un. Putin turned what could have been seen as a desperate appearance into a show of strength. It was more than just a photo opportunity. It was a message, loud and clear. Russia is not alone. For over 3 years, Russia has been locked in a grinding war in Ukraine, a war that Putin once thought would be over in weeks. The West responded with punishing sanctions, cutting Moscow off from banks, markets, and key technologies. European leaders declared that Russia was now a pariah state, but here, in Tianjin, the images told a very different story. Putin was not isolated. He was embraced, a lifeline of allies without China's trade, India's purchases of discounted oil, Iran's weapons, and even North Korea's manpower. Russia would be struggling to keep its war machine alive. Instead, Putin has found ways to bypass the walls the West tried to build around him. China, the world's second largest economy, stepped in to buy Russian energy and supply critical technology banned under sanctions. India, often seen as a balancing power, also became a major customer of Russian oil, giving Moscow billions in revenue. Iran offered not only drones, but also expertise in living under sanctions, something Tehran has perfected over decades. And, though North Korea remains the weakest of the group, even its willingness to supply workers and ammunition carries symbolic weight. The parade in China was, in essence, Putin's victory lap against Western isolation. He wanted the world to see that he still has powerful friends who are willing to stand with him publicly. Europe's worst fear for Europe. These images hit like a warning siren. European governments have spent years tightening their defenses, sending billions in aid to Ukraine, and trying to convince their citizens that the Kremlin is collapsing under pressure. Yet the sight of Putin laughing and waving alongside Xi, Modi, Kim, and Pezeshkian tells another story, one of resilience. It raises an uncomfortable question for European capitals. What if Russia isn't weakening? What if instead it is becoming the centerpiece of a new anti-Western alliance? The fear is not just about Ukraine anymore. It's about Europe's own security. If Russia can lean on Asia's giants to fuel its economy, Europe's strategy of sanctions looks fragile. If Putin has diplomatic backing from leaders across continents, then isolating him may be a dream that never becomes reality. America's uncertainty crossed the Atlantic. The United States also has reasons to worry. Under the America First policies of Donald Trump, Washington's commitment to Europe's security has already been in doubt. European leaders no longer feel fully confident that America will always come to their rescue. That makes the sight of Putin's circle in China even more chilling. A Russia with friends in Beijing, Delhi, Tehran, and Pyongyang poses a different kind of challenge, one that cannot be solved by simply sending more weapons to Kyiv. It is a geopolitical puzzle, forcing Washington and Europe to confront a shifting balance of power. Even Trump himself seemed rattled. In a message aimed at Xi Jinping, he wrote sarcastically, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un, as you conspire against the United States of America." His words carried a hint of humor, but also a trace of unease. Symbol of defiance. Ultimately, Putin's appearance in China was not about friendship or trust. Many of these leaders do not even like each other very much, but they share a common goal: weakening the West's dominance. For Putin, that unity is enough. By standing on that stage, he projected defiance. He wanted the cameras to capture not a lonely dictator, but a man at the heart of a gathering storm. And for audiences back home in Russia, the message was equally important. Their president is not abandoned. Their country is not a pariah. Instead, Russia is part of something bigger, a coalition, however fragile, that seeks to reshape the world order. And that message, more than any speech or parade, is what will echo in Europe and America for months to come. For decades after the Cold War, the global system seemed fixed. The United States and its European allies dominated international institutions, set the rules of trade, and claimed the authority to police conflicts around the world. Washington stood as the undisputed leader, while Europe, tied together under NATO and the European Union, enjoyed relative security under America's protection. Many called it the unipolar moment, a world where power flowed in only one direction, westward. But history has a way of surprising us. The retreat of the United States in recent years, America's role as global leader has been steadily shrinking. Under President Donald Trump, the US openly embraced the slogan "America First." It was more than a campaign phrase. It was a philosophy that questioned the value of costly alliances and overseas commitments. Trump repeatedly criticized NATO, demanded that Europe shoulder more of its own defense, and withdrew from international agreements that once symbolized American leadership. This retreat sent shockwaves through Europe. Suddenly, nations that had grown used to US protection realized they could no longer take it for granted. If America was no longer reliable, then the very foundation of the post-Cold War order looked unstable. Europe's internal struggles. At the same time, Europe itself has been facing deep internal cracks. Economic pressures, rising inflation, and an energy crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine have tested European unity. Meanwhile, the surge of far-right nationalism has divided societies, making consensus harder to achieve. The European Union was designed to be a symbol of collective strength, but in practice, it often struggles to act quickly or decisively. Some countries push for strong support for Ukraine, while others hesitate, worried about their own economic survival. The dream of a united Europe looks fragile when national politics pull in different directions. For leaders in Moscow, Beijing, and beyond, these divisions are opportunities. Where the West hesitates, they advance. Russia, China, and India seize the moment. This is the opening that Russia, China, India, and their partners have been waiting for. For years, these nations chafed under a global system dominated by Washington and Brussels. The West held the power to impose sanctions, to lecture others on democracy, and to shape global trade rules. Now, as cracks appear in the Western alliance, rivals see their chance to rewrite the script. Russia, battered by sanctions and condemned for its invasion of Ukraine, is determined to show it cannot be broken. Putin frames the conflict not just as a war with Kyushu, but as a struggle against the West's control over world affairs. Standing with allies in China, he signals that the future will not be dictated by Washington alone. China, meanwhile, has worked for years to expand its influence. Through trade, infrastructure projects, and military modernization. Xi Jinping's vision of a multipolar world is simple. No single nation should dominate, and certainly not the United States. The parade in Tianjin, with Xi front and center, was a symbolic declaration of this new ambition. India's position is more complex. Officially, it claims neutrality in the Ukraine conflict. Yet its willingness to buy massive amounts of discounted Russian oil gives Moscow a vital financial lifeline. At the same time, India shares the broader goal of reshaping global institutions to reflect the rise of the global South. Nations with large populations and growing economies that no longer want to play second fiddle to Western powers. The unraveling of the old order, the post-Cold War order, was built on the belief that Western dominance was permanent. But in Tianjin, the images told another story. Leaders who may not share deep friendships still share a common purpose: reducing the influence of the West. John Locke, a foreign policy expert at the New Eurasian Strategies Center, explained it well. The established dominance of the Western alliance in international affairs is receding, and they see the opportunity to start to, in a serious way, re-engineer the international system. In other words, what we are witnessing is not just about Russia's war in Ukraine. It's about the dismantling of a system that has shaped the world for over 30 years. Europe on the edge for Europe. This is an unsettling realization. The sanctions campaign against Moscow was meant to weaken Russia and isolate Putin instead. Russia stands bolstered by Asian giants. Europe, once confident that America would always guarantee its security, is now staring at an uncertain future where the balance of power is shifting eastward. And if the old order is cracking, the question is no longer whether the West can stop it. The question is how far the cracks will spread before a new order takes its place. When Vladimir Putin stood alongside Xi Jinping and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Tianjin, the optics were clear. Russia was not alone. But beneath the smiles and handshakes lies a more complicated reality. Neither China nor India is officially Russia's ally. Both insist they are neutral in the Ukraine war, and yet their actions tell a very different story. Neutral in words, supportive in actions, China often claims it does not take sides in the Ukraine conflict. It presents itself as a peace broker, calling for dialogue and diplomacy. Similarly, India has repeatedly described itself as neutral, emphasizing the need for negotiations rather than military escalation. But neutrality on paper is one thing. On the ground, both nations have become critical lifelines for Russia's survival under sanctions. Russia's ability to withstand Western pressure owes much to these so-called neutrals. By continuing to trade with Moscow, and in many cases expanding that trade, China and India ensure that Putin's war machine keeps humming. The oil and gas, lifeline energy, is the most obvious example. When Europe moved to cut off Russian oil and gas, Putin simply turned eastward. India, which had previously imported almost no Russian oil, suddenly became one of Moscow's biggest buyers. Tankers of crude began flowing to Indian ports, where the oil was refined and often sometimes indirectly finding its way back into European markets. China, too, increased its purchases of Russian energy. Together, these two countries replaced much of the market Russia had lost in the West. For Moscow, this meant a steady stream of cash, money that could then be funneled into sustaining the war in Ukraine. The irony is sharp. While European leaders lecture about cutting Russia off, Indian and Chinese money is helping keep the Russian economy afloat. Lose technology and trade it, not just oil and gas. Western officials have repeatedly accused Chinese companies of providing Russia with dual-use technology, goods that can serve both civilian and military purposes. Items like microchips, machine tools, and industrial equipment are all vital for sustaining a modern war effort, while Beijing insists it does not supply weapons to Moscow. The reality is that even non-lethal goods can strengthen Russia's ability to fight. The same is true for India's broader trade with Russia, which includes fertilizers, coal, and defense cooperation dating back decades. This quiet but steady flow of goods and technology undermines Western sanctions. Every loophole is an opportunity for Moscow, and China and India offer some of the biggest loopholes of all: ideological alignment versus self-interestal. It would be a mistake to think of China and India as acting out of loyalty to Russia. Their support is rooted less in ideology and more in self-interest. For China, backing Russia serves multiple purposes. It ties Moscow closer to Beijing, ensuring a powerful neighbor remains dependent on Chinese markets. It also weakens the West, particularly the United States, by forcing Washington to divide its attention between Europe and Asia. From Xi's perspective, a Russia under pressure is a Russia that leans more heavily on China, exactly the kind of strategic leverage Beijing wants. India's motives are different. For New Delhi, cheap oil is an economic boon, helping to keep inflation down for its vast population. Its historic defense ties with Russia also mean India cannot afford to completely sever the relationship. And while India maintains strong ties with the United States, it prefers to keep its options open. By balancing between Washington and Moscow, India preserves its independence on the global stage. In short, this isn't about loyalty to Putin. It's about cold, pragmatic calculations. Why Europe and Ukraine cannot ignore them for Europe and Ukraine. This pragmatism is deeply frustrating. On the battlefield, Ukrainian soldiers fight desperately to defend their homeland. In Brussels, leaders announce new sanctions packages against Moscow. But as long as Russia has alternative markets in Asia, the impact of those sanctions is blunted. Every barrel of oil bought by India, every container of goods shipped from China, is a reminder that the West's campaign to isolate Russia has limits. And those limits are set not just by Moscow's resilience, but by the choices of other global powers. This is why Kyiv and its Western allies cannot ignore Beijing and New Delhi, even if they do not openly supply Russia with weapons. Their economic support gives Putin the breathing room he needs to continue the war. A pragmatic axis. Some analysts call this the rise of a pragmatic axis, not an official alliance, but a convergence of interests. China and India may not share the same vision for the future, but both benefit from a weaker West and a Russia that refuses to collapse. For Putin, that's enough. He doesn't need their friendship. He just needs their trade. The result is a paradox. Nations that claim neutrality are, in practice, shaping the outcome of the war. And as long as they continue to act out of self-interest, the West will struggle to tighten the noose around Moscow. Asterisk, when analysts look at Russia's survival. In the Ukraine war, they often focus on China and India's economic support. But there's another layer to the story, to nations long branded as international outcasts: Iran and North Korea. These rogue enablers may not have the economic power of Beijing or New Delhi, but their contributions are more direct, more dangerous, and often harder for the West to counter. Iran's weapons pipeline, one of the worst-kept secrets of the Ukraine war, is Russia's reliance on Iranian drones. The Reshape 136, a cheap but effective suicide drone, has become a symbol of Moscow's new warfare tactics. Swarming in waves, these drones terrorize Ukrainian cities, hitting power plants, civilian neighborhoods, and critical infrastructure. For Iran, supplying these drones isn't just about profit. It's about exporting influence. By arming Russia, Tehran shows the world it can challenge the West far beyond the Middle East. It also gains valuable battlefield data, as its weapons are tested against NATO-supplied air defenses. Beyond drones, Iran provides Russia with ammunition and has reportedly discussed transferring ballistic missiles. While Western sanctions try to disrupt these flows, Tehran has decades of experience evading restrictions. From secret shipping networks to shell companies in friendly nations, Iran knows how to survive under pressure, and it shares that expertise with Moscow. The limits of friendship still. The Russia-Iran relationship is not without tension. In Syria, the two nations cooperate in propping up Bashar al-Assad's regime, but they don't always see eye to eye. Russia balances its ties with Israel, allowing Israeli jets to strike Iranian targets in Syria without major interference. Tehran, of course, resents this. Moreover, Russia must tread carefully with the United States. While it welcomes Iranian weapons, it also knows that aligning too closely with Tehran risks escalating Western resolve. Putin wants Iran's help, but he doesn't want to become fully dependent on it. In short, Moscow and Tehran are partners of convenience, not brothers in arms. Each uses the other to achieve its goals, but their friendship has limits. North Korea's transactional support if Iran supplies firepower. North Korea offers something different: manpower. Kim Jong Un has few qualms about sending workers abroad or discussing military cooperation when it suits his regime's survival. Reports have surfaced of Pyongyang exploring ways to send laborers to Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine, helping rebuild infrastructure in exchange for food, fuel, or hard currency. While these arrangements may seem minor compared to China's trade or Iran's weapons, they signal a transactional approach that could expand over time. For Kim, supporting Russia is low risk and high reward. His regime is already under heavy sanctions, so there's little more the West can do to punish him. And aligning with Moscow ensures continued backing at the UN Security Council, where Russia's veto power shields North Korea from harsher international measures. Kim's domestic freedom unlike leaders in democratic nations. Kim faces no public opposition at home. He doesn't need to justify decisions to parliament, media, or voters. If he wants to send thousands of laborers or even soldiers abroad, he can do so without fear of political backlash. This domestic freedom gives Pyongyang a unique ability to act boldly in ways other nations cannot. And that unpredictability makes North Korea a dangerous player in the emerging bloc with Russia and China. Why the West should care individually, Iran and North Korea may look like small players compared to China's vast economy or India's global standing, but together they represent a critical element of Russia's survival kit, direct enablers of war. Iran's drones and weapons extend Moscow's ability to terrorize Ukrainian cities. Iran's sanctions expertise helps Russia learn how to dodge Western restrictions. North Korea's manpower and political cover provide Russia with resources it cannot get elsewhere. For Ukraine and its allies, this means the war isn't just against Moscow. It's against a network of sanctioned states that thrive in defiance of Western rules. A shadow alliance, some call this a shadow alliance. An informal network of outcasts bound not by friendship but by survival and opportunity. Iran, North Korea, and Russia all share a common trait. They see themselves as targets of Western hostility. By helping one another, they weaken the pressure and prove that isolation doesn't always work. Some call this a shadow alliance, an informal network of outcasts bound not by friendship, but by survival and opportunity. Iran, North Korea, and Russia all share a common trait. They see themselves as targets of Western hostility. By helping one another, they weaken the pressure and prove that isolation doesn't always work. And yet, this alliance comes with instability. Iran and Russia may clash over Israel. North Korea's erratic behavior could embarrass its partners. But for now, these rogue enablers are giving Putin enough breathing room to keep fighting. And that may be their most dangerous contribution of all. Asterisk. When the world watched the military parade in China, Putin standing shoulder to shoulder with Xi, Modi, Kim, and Iran's president, it wasn't just a photo opportunity. It was a symbolic declaration that a new bloc is rising, one built on shared interests, resentment of the West, and the pursuit of a multipolar world. For decades, global power has largely revolved around Washington and its European allies, but now the stage is visibly shifting, and the Tianjin parade was a flashing warning light for the future of world order. The rise of a new bloc. The parade revealed something crucial. These countries do not need to love each other to stand together. Their partnership is not built on deep friendship, shared values, or cultural ties. Instead, it rests on shared convenience, a common desire to challenge Western dominance and rewrite the rules of international politics. For Russia, the bloc provides lifelines of money, weapons, and legitimacy. For China, it's about positioning itself as the central power in Asia and beyond. For India, it's about maintaining leverage against both Washington and Beijing. And for Iran and North Korea, it's survival, clinging to larger powers that give them space to breathe under sanctions. This is not NATO, where members are bound by a treaty and a shared democratic mission. Instead, it is an alliance of convenience, fragile but functional, driven by overlapping needs rather than lasting trust. NATO's transformation, ironically. The spectacle in China has also jolted the West into action. Europe, once complacent about its security, has begun to transform at a pace few thought possible just a few years ago. Germany, long hesitant about military spending, amended its constitution to boost defense budgets, a move unthinkable a decade ago. Sweden and Finland, once symbols of neutrality, abandoned tradition and joined NATO after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Eastern Europe, particularly Poland and the Baltic states, are rapidly modernizing their armed forces, preparing for the possibility that Russia may one day test NATO directly. The West is learning the hard way that old assumptions no longer hold. The era when Europe could depend entirely on American power to protect its borders is over. Europe's defense, awaking in the biggest shift, lies not in weapons or treaties, but in mindset. For years, Europe treated defense as an afterthought, outsourcing security to Washington while focusing on trade and economic integration. The Ukraine war and events like the Tianjin parade have changed that psychology now. Europe is talking seriously about joint defense industries, cyber warfare capabilities, and long-term resilience against hybrid threats like disinformation and energy blackmail. Even in countries traditionally cautious about militarization, public opinion has swung towards strengthening defenses. In other words, the West is waking up not because it wants to, but because it has no choice. A fragile alliance of convenience still. While Europe is mobilizing, the bloc that emerged in China cannot be dismissed. Its members have shown that they are willing to overlook rivalries to achieve bigger goals. India and China may clash over borders, but both benefit from cheap Russian oil. Iran and Russia may not fully trust each other, but drones and sanctions expertise still flow. North Korea may be seen as unpredictable, but its manpower has value for a Russia stretched thin. The West faces not a rigid alliance, but something trickier, a shifting coalition where states align when it suits them and walk away when it doesn't. This flexibility is both a strength and a weakness. It means the Bloc may never be as united as NATO, but it also makes it harder for the West to break apart. The Trump era uncertainty overlaying all of this is the uncertainty of American politics. Under Donald Trump's America First agenda, Washington has signaled that it may no longer carry the full burden of global leadership. This makes Europe nervous. If the US steps back, can Europe truly defend itself? Can NATO hold together without the glue of American power? Trump himself added fuel to the fire by mocking the China summit, sending a sharp message that US politics is deeply divided on how to handle the rise of this bloc. The coming years may therefore be defined by uncertainty in Washington. Uncertainty in Washington means uncertainty for the entire West, a fractured future looking ahead. The world seems destined for a fractured order. The Tianjin parade was not just a military show. It was a warning that the old system built after the Cold War is cracking. Two competing visions are emerging: a multipolar bloc led by China and supported by Russia, India, Iran, and North Korea, determined to weaken Western dominance. A revitalized West, forced to rearm, rethink, and rediscover the meaning of collective defense. This fractured future will not be clean or simple. Alliances of convenience can shift overnight. Domestic politics, economic shocks, and regional conflicts could redraw the lines again and again. But one thing is certain: the comfortable dominance of the West is over. The world has entered a new chapter, messy, dangerous, and unpredictable.